If you've been doing shadow work for years and still feel fragmented, if you've journaled through your darkness, meditated on your wounds, worked with therapists, and yet the same patterns keep emerging in your relationships, in your self-sabotage, in the mirror of your own mind, there's a psychological reason why some shadows never fully integrate. And it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's not because you're spiritually inadequate or psychologically damaged beyond repair. The truth is far more complex and far more compassionate than the self-help industry wants you to believe. Problem revelation. There's a phenomenon that rarely gets discussed in spiritual communities or even in therapeutic spaces. Some people remain in what I call perpetual shadow processing. They're aware of their shadow material. They can name their wounds, identify their patterns, articulate their trauma with startling clarity. But awareness doesn't lead to integration. Insight doesn't translate into transformation. You know who you are. You've read Jung. You've done the exercises. You've sat with your disowned parts in meditation. You've brought your shadow into the light over and over again. And yet it's still there, unchanged, sometimes even stronger. This creates a particular kind of suffering, a therapeutic hamster wheel where you're constantly working on yourself, constantly processing, constantly trying to heal, but never arriving at that promised land of wholeness. You watch others claim their shadows have integrated, that they've become whole, and you wonder what's wrong with you. The conventional wisdom says you just need to go deeper, face more darkness, do more work. But what if the problem isn't the depth of your work? What if the problem is structural? There's a difference between processing shadow material and integrating it. Processing is intellectual. You see it, name it, understand where it came from. Integration is alchemical. The shadow material becomes part of your conscious personality in a way that actually changes your behavior, your relationships, your felt sense of self. One is archaeology, the other is transformation. And here's what most shadow work teachers won't tell you. Not everyone's psyche is structured in a way that allows for deep shadow integration. At least, not yet. Carl Jung understood something crucial about shadow work that's often lost in contemporary spiritual circles. He knew that shadow integration isn't just about willingness or courage. It requires what he called ego strength, a stable, coherent sense of self that's robust enough to contain what it discovers in the darkness. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This quote gets shared constantly in spiritual communities. But there's a second part that rarely gets mentioned. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. Why is it disagreeable? Not just because the content is painful, but because the process of making darkness conscious threatens the very structure of the ego. And if that structure isn't stable enough, the whole personality can fragment under the weight of what it discovers. Jung was clear about this in his clinical work. He observed that premature or forced shadow integration could lead to psychological crisis, even psychosis in extreme cases. The unconscious material that rises up must be met by an ego that can hold it, contain it, and slowly metabolize it into consciousness. Think of it like a container. Your ego is the vessel. Shadow material is the volatile substance. If you pour that substance into a cracked or fragile vessel, it doesn't integrate. It spills out. It overwhelms. It re-traumatizes. Jung also introduced the concept of the transcendent function. This is the psyche's ability to hold opposites in tension, to contain paradox without collapsing into one side or the other. The shadow is paradox embodied. It contains the parts of you that contradict your self-image, your cruelty alongside your kindness, your selfishness alongside your generosity, your weakness alongside your strength. To integrate the shadow, you must be able to say, I am both loving and cruel. I am both generous and selfish. I am both strong and weak. And mean it. Not as a spiritual platitude, but as a lived reality that doesn't destroy your sense of self-continuity. But what Jung didn't fully articulate, because the research didn't exist yet, was what creates ego strength in the first place. What allows one person to develop a psyche capable of holding paradox, while another person's psyche fragments at the first encounter with their own complexity? This is where contemporary research fills in what Jung intuited but couldn't prove. Contemporary research bridge. Modern psychology has discovered something profound about why shadow integration succeeds or fails, and it has everything to do with your earliest relationships. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, reveals that our capacity for psychological integration is formed in infancy. Children who grow up with consistent, attuned caregivers develop what's called secure attachment. Their nervous system learns that distress can be soothed, that rupture can be repaired, that the self can hold difficult emotions without disintegrating. But children who grow up with inconsistent, frightening, or absent caregivers develop insecure or disorganized attachment patterns. Their nervous system never learns to self-regulate under stress. More importantly, they never develop what psychologists call object constancy, the ability to hold a stable, continuous sense of self and others even when emotions are intense or contradictory. This is critical for shadow work, because the shadow is precisely that part of you that contradicts your stable self-image. To integrate it, you need object constancy. You need to be able to think, I did something cruel, and I am still fundamentally good. These two truths can coexist. But if you have disorganized attachment, your psyche operates in black and white. You're either all good or all bad, either perfect or worthless. There's no stable center that can hold both truths. So when shadow material emerges, it doesn't integrate. It triggers a crisis of identity. Alan Shore, a leading researcher in interpersonal neurobiology, has shown that early attachment experiences literally shape the structure of the brain. Secure attachment develops the right hemisphere's capacity for affect regulation and self-reflection. This is the neurological foundation of what Jung called ego strength. Without this neurological infrastructure, shadow work becomes re-traumatization. You're asking a nervous system that never learned to contain distress to suddenly hold the most disturbing aspects of your own psyche. It's like asking someone who never learned to swim to dive into the deep end. Bessel van der Kolk, in his groundbreaking work on trauma, emphasizes that trauma isn't just about what happened to you, it's about what didn't happen. The absence of attuned relationship, the absence of co-regulation, the absence of a secure base from which to explore the full range of human experience, including the shadow. For trauma survivors, especially those with complex PTSD from childhood, the psyche develops protective fragmentation. Different parts of the self are kept separate to avoid overwhelming pain. This is why internal family systems therapy, developed by Richard Schwartz, has become so effective. It works with the fragmentation rather than trying to force premature integration. Peter Fonagy's research on mentalization adds another layer. Mentalization is the capacity to understand your own mental states and the mental states of others. It's the internal observer that can watch your thoughts and feelings without being consumed by them. This capacity develops through secure attachment, through having caregivers who reflected your inner world back to you with accuracy and compassion. Without mentalization, you can't truly do shadow work. You can't observe your shadow with any distance. You are your shadow. There's no witness consciousness to hold the process of integration. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory reveals why this matters physiologically. Shadow work requires what Porges calls ventral vagal safety, a state of calm physiological arousal where the nervous system feels safe enough to explore difficult material. But if your autonomic nervous system is chronically in sympathetic fight-flight or dorsal vagal shutdown, you literally don't have access to the neural pathways required for integration. Your body is too busy surviving to do the work of psychological transformation. This isn't mystical. It's biological. The vagus nerve, which regulates your sense of safety and connection, must be in a specific state for shadow integration to occur. If your nervous system learned early that the world is unsafe, that state is very difficult to access. Normalization. So let me be absolutely clear about what this means. If your shadow work hasn't led to integration, if you feel stuck in perpetual processing, if you keep encountering the same patterns no matter how much inner work you do, this is not spiritual failure. This is not evidence that you're broken beyond repair. This is structural psychology. Your psyche is not resisting transformation because it's stubborn or because you're not trying hard enough. Your psyche is protecting you from overwhelm. It's operating with the architecture it developed in response to your earliest environment. And that architecture may not yet have the capacity for the kind of deep integration you're seeking. This is actually a sign of health, not pathology. A wise psyche knows its own limitations. It knows when the ego structure isn't stable enough to hold what's in the shadow. It knows when the nervous system is not regulated enough to tolerate the activation that comes with deep psychological work. Carl Jung himself wrote, "The unconscious is not just to be understood, but to be lived." And living the unconscious requires a self that's coherent enough to remain intact through the process. If you grew up with trauma, with insecure attachment, with caregivers who couldn't attune to your inner world, then your psyche built the best possible structure it could with the materials available. That structure kept you alive. It allowed you to function. But it may not be the structure that allows for profound shadow integration. And that's okay, because structure can be rebuilt. But it has to be done in the right order. Guidance phase. So what does this mean practically? If your shadow isn't integrating, what do you do? First, recognize that you might be approaching shadow work backwards. Most contemporary teachers say, dive into the shadow, face your darkness, bring everything into consciousness. But if your psyche doesn't have the structural capacity for that, you're just re-traumatizing yourself. The actual sequence is build ego strength first, then integrate shadow material, build nervous system regulation first, then explore what's dysregulating. Build secure internal relationship first, then encounter the parts of you that feel dangerous or shameful. Here are the markers that tell you whether you're ready for deep shadow integration or whether you need to focus on foundational work first. Marker 1. Can you hold paradox? Can you genuinely sit with two opposing truths about yourself without fragmenting? Can you acknowledge that you hurt someone and still maintain your basic sense of being a good person? Or do you collapse into shame, into all-or-nothing thinking, into identity crisis? If paradox destroys your sense of self, your ego isn't yet stable enough for shadow integration. You need to work on what psychologists call self-continuity. The felt sense that you are still you across time and across emotional states. Marker 2. How does your nervous system respond to activation? When you encounter difficult shadow material, does your body remain relatively regulated? Can you feel the discomfort without dissociating or going into panic? Or do you immediately dysregulate into fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown? If difficult material sends your nervous system into survival mode, you need somatic work before shadow work. You need to build what Dan Siegel calls the window of tolerance, the range of activation your nervous system can handle while still staying present and engaged. Practices like somatic experiencing, EMDR, or even simple vagal toning exercises can expand this window over time. But trying to do deep shadow work while your nervous system is chronically dysregulated is like trying to have a meaningful conversation while someone's chasing you with a knife. Your brain is busy surviving. It's not available for integration. Marker 3. Do you have secure attachment with at least one person? Do you have a relationship, whether with a therapist, a partner, a friend, where you feel genuinely safe to be all of who you are? Where rupture can happen and repair is possible? Where you can express difficult emotions and remain in connection? Shadow integration requires co-regulation. Jung did his deepest work in relationship with others, both in therapy and in his own analysis. The idea that you can integrate your shadow alone, through solitary meditation or journaling, is a modern myth. We become whole in relationship because we were wounded in relationship. If you don't have secure attachment anywhere in your life, your first work isn't shadow integration. It's building safe relationship. This might mean finding a trauma-informed therapist who understands attachment. It might mean slowly learning to trust and be vulnerable with safe people. But without this relational foundation, shadow work tends to strengthen defenses rather than dissolve them. Marker 4. Are you building coherence or just collecting insights? Do you notice actual changes in your behavior, your relationships, your emotional patterns? Or are you just getting really good at analyzing yourself? There's a particular trap in shadow work. You can become very sophisticated at understanding your patterns without anything actually changing. You can describe your shadow in beautiful, poetic language. You can trace every wound back to its origin. But none of that is integration. Integration shows up as behavioral change, as increased capacity for relationship, as more flexibility in how you respond to triggers, as a felt sense of being more whole, even if you can't always articulate it. If you're collecting insights but nothing's changing, you're not doing shadow work. You're doing something else, maybe intellectual defense, maybe spiritual bypassing disguised as depth work. And that's okay to acknowledge, but it means you need a different approach. Resolution, empowerment. Here's what I want you to understand. If you're someone whose shadow remains fragmented, whose patterns persist despite years of inner work, whose transformation feels perpetually out of reach, it doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're spiritually deficient or psychologically hopeless. It means your psyche is wise enough to wait. It means the part of you that guards the threshold between conscious and unconscious knows something crucial. You're not yet ready for what you'll find. Not because you lack courage, but because you lack structure. And structure can be built. Ego strength can be developed. Nervous system regulation can be learned. Secure attachment can be earned even if you didn't receive it early in life. These aren't fixed states. They're developmental capacities that can grow at any age, but they have to be approached in the right order. Foundation first, then the depths. Shadow integration isn't a race. It's not a spiritual achievement to collect. It's the slow, unglamorous work of becoming strong enough to hold your own complexity, of building a self that's coherent enough to contain paradox, of developing a nervous system that's regulated enough to feel without fragmenting. Sometimes the most important shadow work isn't diving into the darkness. It's building the self that can contain it. That's not giving up on transformation. That's honoring the wisdom of your own psyche. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming requires a self stable enough to transform without dissolving. If you're not there yet, that's not failure. That's where you begin. Your shadow will wait. It's been waiting your whole life. It can wait a little longer while you build the container strong enough to hold it. And when you're ready, when the structure is there, when the nervous system is regulated and the ego is stable and the relational foundation is secure, the shadow won't feel like an enemy to conquer. It will feel like a lost part of yourself finally coming home. That's when integration happens, not through force, but through readiness.